how's it going?
Hi, Teresa. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so glad you're here to speak with us on Unapologetically Black Unicorns. We've gotten to know each other, I think, over the past, well, almost a full year, if not quite a year. And I've just been really, really impressed about the work that you're doing at Jed Foundation. So, can you first tell us a little bit about what brought you to working in the mental health space?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on. And I kind of entered the mental health nonprofit role straight out of college, undergraduate. So I was a psychology major in at Harvard, and was always very interested in kind of like adolescent development and how we come to understand our identities and kind of how we navigate different transitions throughout our lives, especially kind of from high school into college and then college into the working space. So for me, I think my interest in mental health kind of first started in high school when, I think I did pretty well academically, but I always felt like my teachers and the community around me didn't really understand who I was or really try to kind of foster my growth in kind of areas outside of my academic work. So kind of building emotional kind of intelligence or my social skills, kind of life skills, basic how to navigate kind of the outside world, right? And so in high school, I was lucky enough to get to know a few mentors, one of them kind of being my Spanish teacher and my soccer coach. And I would sit in his classroom every morning and just chat. And kind of that was a really, really awesome experience as to see like someone who got to see me as a person. And kind of in college, transitioning to that process, I kind of wanted to find someone like that, a mentor. So luckily my freshman year proctor tutor was a very big inspiration for me. And so through that process, I really got to think, what can we do as far as within our school systems or even kind of with everything surrounding you to really promote things that are beyond just the grades and, college and how to, prepare academically. So that's what really, really drew me to this work. In college, I did various kind of peer support work. I organized our intramural activities, and then I was part of our honor council. So at the honor council, we kind of work with students who are kind of going through some sort of administrative review, and it's oftentimes a very challenging process, more kind of on the emotional side as well. And so I was kind of one of those supporters and kind of worked with so many different students on how to navigate that process. And so I think through that lens, I really, recognize that sometimes students might kind of make a mistake or do something that they don't want to, but that underlying that is so much more, right? Like
Mhm.
a lot of times they're maybe having emotional difficulties or struggling with the acclimation process to college. And so I think through all this work, I realized that we can do so much more to kind of support our, students like me who are kind of navigating this process. And ultimately, that's what led me to Jed.
First of all, I didn't really know all of that about your story, and that's
Yeah.
really so critically important for people to hear because I think as I think about not back in my life as a student that was so gazillion million years ago, but more about when I worked in higher ed myself and working with high school students and college students, that there's so much pressure on grades and test scores, just so much pressure that it's so critically important to see the student as a whole person and to support that emotional growth and learning, not just the academic part, but the human who are you as a person part. And you're
Yeah.
developing into that part as especially a young person in high school and going into college. So, I'm so glad that, you recognize that and you found some mentors, but certainly accidentally finding a mentor is not the best way, but really thinking
Yeah.
about it with some intention, I think is really fantastic. And how did that get you to Jed, where it like turns into something that's actualized?
Yeah, yeah. So as you said, like I sort of accidentally found a mentor and a lot of the things that I wanted personally, kind of I needed to proactively reach out to. And I think that's what really led me to Jed, where, our mission is to kind of protect emotional health and prevent suicide for teens and young adults. And we do this through a lot of kind of individual engagement through our youth-facing campaigns and on our social media and partnering with media companies. But a lot of our work is also with kind of advising colleges and high schools on kind of systemically, right, how to create kind of strong communities and systems and cultures around mental health. And so we work, with administration on kind of evaluating their mental health policies, their culture, and really trying to ground the entire school community in this kind of culture of care and support, and making sure that students are supported. So this kind of mission and work really drew me, because I think this is what I wanted growing up in high school and in college, where the systems that surround me are really trying to reach out and make sure that students are supported, that faculty and support staff and everyone have the proper resources, and kind of this public messaging that mental health is a priority for colleges and for high schools. And if students are in need of help, that's totally okay, and there are avenues to do that, right? And I think it's one thing to say that, and then there's another thing to actually see that in action. And we can continue to make progress in this field, but that's kind of what drew me to Jed, is kind of that emphasis and the focus kind of on working directly with teens and young adults.
Yeah, and I think since I've had my involvement with Jed through my day job, as I call it, it's really helped me to see also really better tie together the work that I was doing when I worked in college admissions as a college admissions administrator. It just reminds me back in the day of, wow, what if, and maybe Jed was around at that time, but I didn't know it was around. I don't think it was, but certainly how, you have different types of campaigns where people openly talk about sort of the supports that they need and giving encouragement to other students to seek out help. You do, fantastic reports and things like that. And much of it is youth led and youth driven. So it's not like an imposition on youth, but really the youth saying, no, this is what we need. This is how we need it. And we're going to be a part of it. So when we think about youth mental health, the other thing that I like to talk about is sort of those intersections that, young people, high school students, college students, they're not monolithic, of course, that they're intersections related to race, culture, sexual orientation, and gender identity, disability, and so forth. So when you're thinking about youth mental health and those intersections, what are some of the things that come to mind for you?
I think most importantly, I kind of want to kind of go down to that individual kind of youth, that high school student, that college student, and having things that really resonate with that individual person. And as you alluded to, right, we have so many different identities and intersectionalities and kind of communities. And in those sorts of identities, communities, is mental well-being, emotional health kind of a priority, meaning like if someone is really involved in kind of a sports team or in a cultural group, are those organizations or those leaders in those groups really attuned to those needs, right? Like, are those people in those groups, is that culture healthy, right? And are there steps in place where if there's someone who might be struggling or having challenges, do they have a confidant, someone that they're close to, at least one person that they can, talk to and work through some of those challenges? So I think at the core should be the ideal. And so how do we kind of really create that system? And I think this is some of the stuff that Jed does, is kind of working directly with those leaders, and through our campaigns, really trying to target youth and, with different identities, and saying like, look, like there's people that look like you that are part of this organizations that you're interested, or, we do some PSAs with actors and celebrities and influencers and of different kinds, right? So really trying to find that person who that youth can resonate with. And so I think it takes kind of both that individual outreach and finding that person that one particular youth can get that message across, and then like systemically, working with these organizations or with school systems to really ensure that there is that system of support around each individual person.
Yeah, I totally remember when I was in high school. I was I was a minority, literally a minority, in the sense of there were very few African American students at the school that I was attending. It was predominantly white. and nothing else. And there were like this smattering of Black kids. And so sometimes being able to, and nothing as far as the teachers were concerned. So just to be, really clear about that. So that, if I was struggling emotionally, it's like, well, who am I supposed to talk to? Who can I trust? And who can understand maybe what it feels like to be one of a few or one of the only ones in my class, because there are just not enough of us to go around that usually I was the only Black person in my class. Same thing when I went to college. I actually selected initially the first college that I went to. I selected a college in which I was, again, it would be like me and only me,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, who do you talk to and how do they understand what you're going through, especially as it relates to your emotional well-being? And you don't want people to think less of you either, even though that shouldn't be the case when you're just talking about needing some support.
Yeah. And, going back to my high school experience, my soccer coach and my Spanish teacher, he was, one of the few kind of BIPOC teachers in my entire school. And you could kind of see that where I'm Asian American and other people like me would also kind of convene in his room
Mm-hmm.
before school. And there was that kind of organic community that just came out of having that trusted adult who shared some of the experiences, who are trying to navigate this predominantly
Right.
white community and culture. And so that's what I mean by like starting from kind of the grassroots and really building these people who are champions for mental health and are comfortable having these sorts of conversations. And through that, you can kind of build upwards and create communities and find larger groups, but it really starts at the base.
Right, right. So one of the things that I'm noticing about you, by the way,
Mhm.
is because wait, are you still chief of staff at Jed or do you have a new role?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm still chief of staff. I
Okay.
recently, so Jed kind of went through a little bit of a organizational change where we have this new external affairs branch, and kind of I'm doing more of that work. So looking at our advocacy work, looking at our strategic partnerships, looking at our kind of enterprise-wide communications. But yeah, my title is still chief of staff.
And but before you were chief of staff, were you and did you start off as an intern and then you became chief of staff? And then is that kind
Yeah.
of the trajectory?
Yeah, yeah. So I started summer of 2019 as an intern under a high school program. Came back July of 2020. So I've been here for a little over a year.
Wow, wow. I love talking about this, especially as people think about, what is my role? How do I get into this? And I see you as a leader that is championing youth mental health. So, what do we need to do to support youth to become leaders, or for those who are already in leadership in the mental health field or advocacy movement? You're kind of an example of that. So, what else should any of us be doing to support our youth to move into leadership positions?
Yeah, yeah. I think obviously there's so many different youth-facing mental health organizations that youth can get involved with, whether that is Active Minds on college campuses, or I was part of this organization called Youth Move National and did this training called the Youth Advocate Leadership Academy. So I think there are these like formal ways that you can kind of get involved. And I'm sure lots of high schools and colleges have other sorts of mental health peer organizations, peer support, things like that. But I would also say, like, this kind of goes back to my earlier point, like any sort of affiliation or organization you're part of, you can serve as kind of a mental health advocate or wellness kind of champion within those groups and really bring in sort of resources or start these conversations. You don't need to be in a specific mental health organization to do that.
Mhm.
So, if you're part of some sort of club or you're at a company, or if you're a gamer or something like that where you're part of a league, or there's so many different ways that we can kind of infuse this culture of mental well-being and checking in on your friends and encouraging self-care and wellness. So I think through that you'll find these opportunities where you can be an advocate and leader for your community.
Wow. Yeah, you brought up gaming. You shouldn't have gone there as I was just unpacking all of my different dice from the PAX convention, PAX
Yeah.
Unplugged in Philadelphia. But one of the interesting things about going to these different conventions, I was at Comic-Con in San Diego this year, very, very scaled down, masked up, vaccinated, double checking and triple checking your vaccination and boosters, et cetera, to participate in person. That the real intentional intention, is that a word? I don't know. I just made it up. So it is. But around people's emotional well-being and checking in, like there was a game that was running. It was on Twitch as well as being run live. And it was really interesting as I was watching it also being played on Twitch while I was sitting in the actual auditorium watching them play it on stage. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons type game using the same sort of gaming rules, but different land and different world and different time. It was interesting to see messages throughout the Twitch game about checking in on people's emotional well-being, encouraging people, take a step away from the screen if you need to. Well, these are hard times. If you need to reach out to someone, feel free to reach out to, this group or this person. And I thought, wow, this is not your grandma's gaming anymore. It's a whole new way of not just engaging people in the game, but ensuring that they're safe and they know that they have a community that cares. And I thought that was pretty cool. The other thing that was cool is to see more people in that gaming and cosplay and sort of Comic-Con, anime, all that kind of stuff community openly talking about mental health and living with mental health conditions, and how that community has created a space for them to be fully themselves, and to find health and healing, and to be in community with other people where folks aren't as judgmental, but finding a nice and safe community. So bring up gaming, and I will just go down. You did it, and I went down that lane. So I'm going to come back into our lane. The other thing, that you've really, I think, advocated for and been talking about is men's mental health. So, and this is such an important topic because, we know our men, but tell me a little bit about sort of your thoughts around men's mental health and things that we could be doing better there too.
Yeah. I think we still kind of live in this culture of, I would say, like hypermasculinity or very constrained notions of what it means to be a man. And one of the core tenets of that is emotional restraint, or not opening up or revealing your feelings, whether good or bad. And I would like to see sort of that narrative and that framework evolve a bit, where we can reframe some of those kind of notions and think about maybe vulnerability as a sign of strength, as a sign of courage, rather than as a weakness, and encouraging young boys and men to have different identities and stretch what it means to be a man. Because I think a lot of the times, if you're not sort of this macho type, you're looked down upon or not respected in some ways. And I think that creates a very unhealthy culture, especially for teens and young men trying to find their own identity and who they are. And so I recently worked on this white paper called A Call to Strengthen Men's Mental Health for Jed. And we looked at some great kind of campaigns that are out there, different programs that are out there that are trying to tell these different narratives and create these communities where sort of like these support groups where it is okay to, be vulnerable and share your thoughts. And we also kind of through that white paper made some recommendations. I think oftentimes because kind of boys and young men are more silent about these topics, that there's a notion that, oh, they're doing fine, that they're acclimating okay, but in reality they aren't. So again, I think systemically and culturally, we need to, if you're in environments where you are working with this population, to proactively reach out and have those conversations and check in. And I think naturally over time, if this group is surrounded by people that they trust and that they're okay opening up to, that you'll kind of see that there are certain things where maybe they're having challenges or struggling, and they are really looking for someone that they can confide in, right? And so, especially within kind of the Asian community, you have a little bit of stigma already with mental health, and then added on to kind of these notions of masculinity that we kind of grew up with in the West. A lot of this is my own experiences as well. So
Mhm.
yeah, I'm very, very passionate about this, and want
Yeah.
to continue to do more here.
Oh, that's excellent. And I was going to give you like, what do I say? Three snaps up, two thumbs up, lots of claps, because I just want to like hashtag vulnerability as strength, right? Like that's really, really powerful, especially, yes, for young boys and men. Because of, well, I have heard the term hypermasculinity. I've just never used it, but I think that's very true of many cultures, to think about sort of men in this very, and again, maybe from Latino, I'll borrow a little bit that machismo, that very macho, very manly thing where, we kind of stuff our emotions down. And so you don't know how somebody's really doing. And I'm so glad that this is an area of passion for you, and that there's a white paper with some recommendations as well. You've talked a little bit too about sort of Asian and, folks, and how to think about coming from a Asian culture and background. And quite frankly, just like me as an African American, it was very hard for me to find leaders in the behavioral health or mental health movement that looked like me. They were kind of few and far between, and that's why I actually started Unapologetically Black Unicorns, was to kind of help people see how many people are really out there and hear from them, and what more can we do, since representation really matters. And I'm particularly interested in ensuring that we increase BIPOC leaders and advocates. Is there anything more we could be doing for our Asian and South Asian folks to ensure that we're not just inclusive, but also advancing leadership and advocacy?
Yeah, I think we just need to see more people who are out there. And I've worked with many different Asian mental health advocates, and I know they are very passionate, they're very committed to this. It's just there isn't really this overarching structure or community for them to connect with. And so I think that's something that I want to contribute in building in the future. But I think for the time being, it's really being proactive and reaching out and doing things like what you've done, creating like a podcast to connect people of common interest, right? And so going back to my earlier point, like you don't have to be 100% invested in kind of this kind of notion of mental health advocate, like whatever sort of affiliation organization. And every college campus I'm sorry, not every, but like many college campuses have kind of an agency and organization, right? And within those, if you have a passion in mental health and well-being, like can you step up and try to shift the culture, or bring in some of this work or resources? So I think that's an important first step. And then I think what I would like to see is in mass media, luckily this past year or two, we've seen actors and more public figures and nonprofit leaders. And I think Asian representation is improving. There can be room to grow, but can those people who have more platform, like a bigger platform now, can they use that to talk about mental health and talk about wellness? I think that would be, pretty transformative for our community.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think sometimes it's also about the language and how and where to enter in. And I know sometimes mental health in some people's mind equals mental illness, and that becomes a harder conversation to have. But of
Right.
course, we all have mental health, and sometimes people like to refer to it as, our emotional well-being, and how is our emotional well-being during the pandemic, and how is it during, Black Lives Matter, or the whole, Asian hate, quote unquote, situation. That this is when our emotional well-being is really most fragile. I think
Yeah.
because it's kind of, we're under attack. So our emotions and our mental health can also be under attack. So how do we build up the protective factors and community to be able to openly talk about what we need to really maintain and sustain and build up our, I'll call it our emotional well-being muscle,
Yeah.
so our mental health muscle, right? So, but yeah, I think that's what I found too, is sometimes if I use mental health, it's off-putting to people, though that's what it is. So I will use the language that is comfortable for folks, even if it's not the parlance of policy. How can we talk about it in ways that people can enter in? I think there are all sorts of
Yeah.
different ways to do that.
Yeah. I really like the term kind of fitness and kind of strength, right? Like I think those are like mental strength or mental fitness. I think just kind of carrying more of a positive connotation, kind of increase in buy-in
Yeah.
for people. Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing, well, what to do when things aren't going so well, that, there's it's not a negative thing. It's just a thing like when you get a cold or when you get the flu or, when you have any kind of attack on your physical well-being, that's not a negative thing. It is just a thing. And, we need to know what to do when that happens as well. So what kind of advocacy things are you interested in as far as pushing for legislation that provides maybe increased funding or guidance around mental health?
Yeah. So at Jed, this past year, I've kind of taken a little bit of leadership role in our organization with our advocacy work and kind of really building out our policy platform, the types of legislation that we want to support, and kind of mainly within the school mental health space. How can we increase funding for schools to hire more mental health professionals, to fund programs that kind of bring in social emotional learning and wellness into their schools? For colleges, like we have this bill where we're trying to encourage all colleges to create comprehensive systems around mental health and make sure that every college has a plan for how to support student mental health. So I've had that opportunity to see all this in action at Jed. And I think that's, again, another lever to create this system, create this culture by really infusing mental health into policies and making sure that this is a priority for schools and for systems where youth interact. So yeah, it's a lot of meeting with different advocacy organizations and legislative offices. And we also have been able to advise kind of a few parts of the executive branch, so the CDC, the U.S. Department of Education on their guidance around COVID reopening and making sure that mental health is a core area of that. So yeah, a lot of different tentacles that we,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
great. I mean, I think this is when people want to have a better understanding of kind of what's behind the green curtain, you're helping people see what's behind the green curtain, that
yeah,
policy just doesn't show up because it shows up. It's because people like you and others are talking to the legislators, talking to the advocacy groups, providing guidance and what we call TA or technical assistance. So there are lots of different roles people can play in sort of making a difference for how this is actually actualized on the ground. So some people might be like, oh, that's not really my thing, but to be able to talk to, a staffer or a legislator is really meaningful to people, and they like doing that kind of stuff. Karis Myrick, I like doing that kind of stuff,
exactly.
because sometimes, they're not the experts in some of this stuff, but they are the people who have to move the legislation or the policy related to this stuff. So they need people like you and others, and Jed kind of doing that work.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap up by talking about something that, this is going to be on a personal level, and we can both share about it if we want, but let's talk about our wellness and well-being. So what are some of the wellness strategies that you use now or that you used as a student? Talked a little bit about talking to the coach and, the Spanish teacher. Or there are other things that you do maybe now to be mindful of your wellness?
Yeah. So I do for my work, I do a lot of external facing stuff, but personally, I'm actually, very much an introvert. And so I really, really need kind of my me time. And I think over the years, I've gotten smarter and wiser about like what are things that actually rejuvenate me and allow me to decompress. And so big kind of outdoors person, kind of both in the physical sense. So I do a lot of hiking and like to, just take walks outside, but also sort of in the virtual sense, I'm a big like nature documentary person.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll just kind of Google like or find YouTube videos of like cool parts of the world. And that's a really cool way for me to escape, I guess.
Ah, great.
And I like to take road trips when I'm home too, and I have my car, and then kind of finding spaces that kind of are healing or protective in a way. And so like coffee shops being one of them. I'm a big like Panera Bread person too. I mean, that's where I get so much of my work done.
Uh,
As I said, my car is like a good space to kind of meditate a little bit, if you will. I
Mhm.
play a lot of sports, and so that's another way I kind of really like just kind of completely empty soccer field and just running, and I think that's just very like spiritually fulfilling for me. So
Mhm.
yeah, and then I'm a big like reader. I kind of only read nonfiction at this point, which is a little interesting, but that's been helpful. And then I also kind of watch a lot of just like reality television, like Survivor, Big Brother,
Oh, wow.
all the different shows on Netflix. So yeah, I have a bunch of different things,
Oh,
but
cool.
I think really again just thinking about this and making this a deliberate part of my day has been helpful.
Yeah, excellent. I had no idea about all of those things. And I love watching nature documentaries too. I love the
Yeah.
one about the octopus. Did you see that one where
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was really good. That was
Mindfulness.
like so good, so good. But yes, you heard, I do the gaming thing. I love, I mean, I'm not like, that's the only thing I do because that sounds
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh. I don't do it on Twitch as much as I probably would like to. I think I would probably do it a little bit too much, but yeah,
Yeah.
I love learning about different games and gaming, mainly because I am an introvert as well. And what I
Mhm.
like about sort of doing tabletop role playing games is I can be in community with others when and where and how I want to, which is kind of like I can control like how much people time I have and how much people time I don't have. And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a person who likes being a lot of times by myself and doing those sort of re-energizing. Like I get all of my energy gets used up in a positive way when I'm around a lot of people. So then I need to kind of like re-energize myself by not being with people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do a lot of I love documentaries, all types of documentaries, and watching documentaries. I love creating cosplay characters and
Yeah.
developing the outfits for a cosplay, because then I can show up as somebody else and not really me, which is very protective thing.
Yeah.
And then sadly, I really like my work is very healing for me. That sounds weird. Like
Yeah.
you need a break from the work, but actually sometimes doing this work is it keeps me mentally agile, I think is kind of what
Yeah.
happens there. So yeah. And I'm not a sports person. Sorry, people. I can't go there. If people know what I look like, it's like, yeah, clearly you are not a sports person. But anyway, I really want to thank you, Henry, for joining me and having this great conversation. I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing, especially on behalf of youth and college students, young men in the Asian community. But, for high school and college students at large, just want to thank you so much for sharing a bit of yourself with us today.
Thank you so much. And I think the last thing you said really resonated. Just this work is incredibly fulfilling for me as well. And meeting so many different champions and people who are so passionate about this work, organizations who are so passionate about this work, kind of really makes me hopeful for the future. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you again
sure
for
thing. Sure
inviting me
thing.
on.
All right. Well, thank you. And I just want to remind our guests, listen to me. You're the guest. Thank you for being a guest, Henry. It's a fantastic conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. And I just want to remind our listeners to join in to Unapologetically Black Unicorns next week.